Hey everybody. As you can see, I'm sitting in my garage in my car because I don't want to wake up the kids who were trying to sleep. But I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the big announcement that Apple had today concerning the fate of the Mac Pro and also discussing something about the upcoming iMacs. And just to provide a little context, I've actually talked a lot about this. If you listen to my podcast, which a small, tiny number of you do, which hasn't been updated in a while, I've talked a little bit about some of the drama that's gone on with the Mac in the last several months. And kind of just to provide some context for this, if you think about Apple's Mac computer lineup, think about the desktops. Most people who have used a Mac desktop have probably used an iMac. That's been by far their best-selling desktop computer for many years. Hasn't been super long since it's been updated, but it's one of those computers that we've expected Apple to release some updates for sometime this year, and they did talk about that today, which we'll get to. And then there's the top-of-the-line computer, the Mac Pro, and if you've ever seen one of these, it used to look like a big aluminum box, and people kind of lovingly called it the cheese grater because it used to actually have a perforated front that kind of looked like a cheese grater. And then in 2013, they redesigned it into a shape that's like a cylinder, and so a lot of people kind of lovingly refer to it as the trash can. But that's what the Mac Pro looks like today. Well, the problem is Apple released that Mac Pro in 2013, and it was kind of a time in the life of the Mac where a lot of people were kind of criticizing Apple and saying, hey, Apple's maybe lost some of its innovation mojo. And so Apple redesigned completely the Mac Pro in 2013 into the black cylinder that you'll see today if you go to Apple's website and search for it. And it was something that Apple was clearly proud of. In fact, Phil Schiller, Apple's Senior Vice President of Worldwide Marketing, who introduced the product at the event, got up and said, if you'll pardon the language, "Can't innovate my ass," to kind of say, look, critics, this is what we can do. And the 2013 Mac Pro was an incredible feat of industrial design. It's amazing how they can engineer it and get it so quiet and all that went into it. But unfortunately, it never was exactly what the Pro customer who was used to buying Mac Pros was looking for in a replacement. Everybody in the Pro market really wanted just a faster version of the cheese grater Mac Pro with updated CPUs and GPUs and the best available RAM at the time, and instead they got something completely redesigned. And from a Pro customer who's used to buying the Mac Pro standpoint, the big problem with the trash can Mac Pro is that you couldn't open it up and do really any kind of internal upgrades to it, without getting out the soldering gun and doing things that, are going to break your warranty and all sorts of things. And so, it wasn't at all what the Pro customer was looking for. That doesn't mean it was a bad machine. It was a great machine for a lot of uses. But it just never caught on in the market. To me, it reminds me of, if you think way back, the old Power Mac G4 Cube, which, like the 2013 cylinder Mac Pro, was a feat of industrial design. I'm sorry, I'm hit the close. My battery's running low, so if this feed just drops dead, that's what's going on. The Power Mac G4 Cube was a feat of industrial design, and it just never caught on in the marketplace. Now, it's not an exact perfect analogy, but you kind of get the drift. The biggest problem with the 2013 Mac Pro, though, is that Apple never did update it. They released it in 2013, and then there was never an update to it at all. And, it's one of those products that the Mac Pro and the Power Mac before it used to be much more important to Apple's brand than it is now. For one thing, while Apple used to be the Mac company, now they're primarily the iPhone company. That doesn't mean the Mac's not important. In fact, if you look at the numbers, the Mac is, if you broke the Mac off into its own company, it would be just on the verge of being a Fortune 100 company just by itself. So it's a little misleading when you look at Apple's pie chart and you see how vastly the iPhone is taking up that pie chart and how small the Mac looks. You have to keep it in that perspective. The iPhone sells in numbers that it's just hard to get your mind around. So the Mac is still selling extremely well. But when you break down the Mac even further, some of the numbers that they released today were that 80% of Mac customers are buying a laptop Mac, 20% are buying a desktop. And out of that, most of the people that are buying a desktop Mac are buying an iMac, vastly more. Now, probably part of that is because the Mac Pro hasn't been updated, but it's gotten to the point where if you need a desktop Mac, for most customers, even most Pro customers, an iMac is going to do just fine. I mean, it's got a big 5K screen. It's a pretty fast machine for most tasks. Where you really need the Mac Pro in is for, the really high-end uses where computational power from the processor and the graphics cards are super important. So, big scientific data crunching, big powerful video rendering, that sort of thing is going to really rely heavily on the kind of specs that the Mac Pro is designed to put out. So again, we're sitting at this time where, for a couple of years, the MacBook Pro, which is by far Apple's most important Mac in terms of its importance to how many they sell, hadn't been updated. We're sitting at a time where the iMac is coming up on a couple of years between updates. The Mac Mini, which most people don't buy, hasn't been updated in forever. And again, the Mac Pro is sitting at 4 years. So the problem is this was starting to cause some people to kind of question Apple's commitment to the Mac. Look, Apple, you haven't updated the Mac with the kind of regularity we'd like to see. Do you still care about the Mac? Are you still planning to do it? Or are you looking at this future where you're going to replace the Mac with the iPad or something like that? And so that narrative had been bubbling up, and even the launch of the new Mac Pro last year didn't, satisfy all the concerns that were out there, because again, the Mac Pro is sitting out here at now 4 years without an update. So Apple had to do something, and today they did something about it. They didn't release a new Mac Pro yet, unfortunately, but what they did do was hold a private briefing for a small handful of prominent members, influential members of the tech press, and said, look, we need to talk. Here's what our plans are. And so they specifically said, look, a new Mac Pro is in the works. And they did something kind of uncharacteristic of them. They kind of admitted and kind of apologized for the lack of updates and said, look, we had big ideas for the new Mac Pro when we released it in 2013. We thought it was something special, but it just didn't meet the needs of a lot of our customers. And I really think this was a situation where when Apple released that 2013 Mac Pro, they really thought that they were skating to where the puck was going. That's something that Apple prides itself on, that it always tries to do, is anticipate kind of where the industry is going and get there ahead of everyone else. And I think they really thought they were doing this with the 2013 Mac Pro, and it just was kind of a swing and a miss. And so they've kind of said, look, we realized that this didn't catch on, and we kind of painted ourselves into a corner. And so they announced today via this briefing that they are coming out with a new Mac Pro. The downside is it's not going to be available this year. So we're probably looking at sometime in 2018 before this thing hits the market. But the good news is they're working on it, and they really came out in this briefing and said in no uncertain terms, look, we know we haven't been updating the Mac the way our customers want us to, but the Mac is still very important to us, and we're going to continue working on this. And so I'm very excited by this. I had actually, a lot of people, even a lot of long-term Mac watchers have been very pessimistic toward Apple and looking at the state of the Mac. But I said coming into 2017 that I thought this was going to be a big year for the Mac, and that I was kind of going down as saying they were going to come out with a new Mac Pro. So I'm happy to see that I was right about that. And it's a really good thing, because again, it just shows in no uncertain terms Apple's still committed to the Mac. They released the new MacBook Pro, and I think if you had any doubts about that, it should have been apparent with the 2016 MacBook Pro, because whether you love the Touch Bar or not, it's clear that Apple put a lot of time and resources into developing that computer, into making it thinner and lighter than it was already. But now I hope that it's put to rest all the concerns that maybe Apple's forgetting about the Mac or not interested in the Mac anymore, because they really, if you go, and I think in particular I would recommend that you go to TechCrunch and find the article that Matthew Panzarino wrote, who was present at this briefing. And it sounds like that he had a tape recorder and recorded it, and people transcribed it later, so that you can really, get a good sense of the things that were said at that meeting. But it seems like they really went out of their way to say, look, we still care about the Mac. We still have a lot of interesting things coming. They also said that they were planning to have some updates to the iMac coming soon. which is extremely exciting because, again, and they highlighted this at the briefing, a lot of people, a lot of pro customers even, are using the iMac because they feel like, that really meets their needs. And so new updates to the iMac coming later is good news. And they even said specifically that they would have some configurations specifically targeted at pro users. So it'll be interesting to see what the specs are on those, kind of what they're referring to there. They also said that in addition to working on developing a new Mac Pro, that they're going to be bringing out a new Apple display again. That was another thing that kind of caused some concern about it kind of caused people to question Apple's commitment to the Mac, is that, Apple has basically always had their own Apple branded standalone displays. And when the new MacBook Pros were released last fall, they didn't come out with a new display. In fact, they specifically pointed MacBook Pro customers to some new 4 and 5K displays from LG, which are actually really nice displays. But again, it was kind of disconcerting if you've been watching the Mac for a long time, because it just seemed like maybe Apple was done with the display business, which had always been a big part of their Mac business before. So it was good to hear today from some of Apple's top leadership that they are indeed coming out with a new display alongside that new Mac Pro. So it was an exciting day. It's very rare for Apple to comment about unreleased products, especially ones that, it sounds like in the case of the Mac Pro in particular, are several months out at least. I think in general, Apple's secrecy serves them well, but I think at this point that narrative had been building so much, and that concern among the Mac faithful that maybe Apple wasn't committed to the Mac anymore, that they needed to kind of come out and say something. And so I'm really glad that they did that. So this was a great announcement. I was really excited about it. I was seeing the comment section, Jake was asking about the fact that the perception that they've kind of fallen behind, and I think there's something to that. I think they even kind of acknowledged that they had not met their customers' expectations in terms of coming out with updates. What I didn't see from any of the comments is any specifics on why the trash can Mac Pro didn't receive any updates over the course of the 4 years. So I'm still kind of absorbing all this news. So if anybody saw any comments about that, let me know. So that's still kind of a mystery. It would have been nice to have seen some updates here and there. My guess is they've gotten that message loud and clear, and I personally think we're going to see more regular hardware updates to the Mac from Apple going forward. We just had the new MacBook Pros debut in October, and I think we're going to see a speed bump of some sort to that computer later this year as well. So I think Apple's getting back on track with the Mac and with releasing the kind of updates that people want to see, but we'll kind of wait and see what happens. We'll wait and see what the specs are on this new iMac, and we'll wait and see what the new Mac Pro looks like. But I'm very encouraged by the news that came out today. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what they have in store for the future. Also, encouragingly, they did release a speed bump update to the Mac Pro today. So you might be thinking, well, who's going to buy one of those today knowing that there's a new Mac Pro coming out? Well, as they kind of mentioned today, there are some customers for whom the current Mac Pro is a fine product. It just needed a little speed bump. And I think there are certainly companies who might be just really need to buy a computer of that type, and they can't wait, until 2018. So it's good to see some attention being paid there and some updates coming to that. Well, that's it for now. I just wanted to kind of jump in and just kind of talk about my initial thoughts on what happened today. And if you have any other questions, leave a comment. I'd be glad to try to answer them. And I will talk to you guys later.